Understanding the composition, Part A. First we ask, what is a composition? A composition consists of TEC paragraphs, and remember TEC is topic, sentence, evidence, commentary, and clincher, that individually elaborate on a specific point of a complex main idea, which is the overall main focus of the writing. The composition has 3 parts: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Within our introduction, the introduction is the first thing that your readers see. So you have to make a good impression with your introduction. An introduction also has 3 parts. We have the hook, which catches the reader's attention. Then we introduce the reader to the topic and set the tone. And the third thing is that we present the thesis statement. So notice with our catching the reader's attention, we have an H in hook. The second is to introduce the reader to the topic, I. And the third is to include the thesis statement, T. So HIT is our acronym for the introduction. If we can remember, hit the nail on the head when we start our essay, we can remember the 3 parts that go into your introduction. So let's first look at the hook. And I will tell you honestly that some of the other teachers prefer not to use the word hook because they say, we're not fish and we don't need to be hooked into reading your essay. But I like the idea because it gives you the image of hooking somebody's attention. And to understand the importance of a good introductory sentence, think about TV commercials. Those TV commercials that are played during the Super Bowl, for example. They're very popular. But there's always some kind of hook in the first few seconds of that commercial that's critical to capture the reader's attention. So there are 6 ways or techniques that you can use to write a hook for a paper. You can begin with a question. You could begin with an anecdote or example. You could state a startling fact or an unusual opinion. You could begin with background information. You could set the scene, or you could begin with a simple statement of your thesis. So we're going to look at each of these in this lesson, and I'm going to give you kind of a definition of each, which I want you to write down. Then I'm going to give you an example of each, which you do not need to write down. We're going to use a fictitious student writing a fictitious essay as an example. And our fictitious essay is on the roadside attractions throughout America. So let's get going and look at these examples. You can begin with a question. Your question could be one that contradicts your thesis. It could be a rhetorical question, a question that nobody expects to be answered. It could be an intriguing question, something that fascinates your reader. So let's look at this first example of a question. What would possess a man to dig a giant hole in the ground and then plunge 10 vintage Cadillacs nose first into the holes? Bury them with just the back sticking out. Would you believe it was done for an artistic purpose? Stanley Marsh III claims this is why he created his Cadillac Ranch in 1973, just west of Amarillo, Texas, on Interstate 40. His creation has led many people to question, is it art? Okay, so this is an example of starting an essay with a question. Our second technique is to begin with an anecdote or an example. An anecdote is a little story or real-life incident that may be humorous or just intriguing. I remember when I was in kindergarten and my parents bought me my first yo-yo. To me it was like magic the way my father, sister, and mother, nearly everybody but me, could make it bob down and then shoot right back up to where it started. If you could do tricks with it, then you would definitely be some sort of genius. After I had gained a modest amount of skill with the yo-yo, I grew bored with it. Now, though, after visiting the National Yo-Yo Museum in Chico, California, a little bit of the magic comes back. So this is an example of starting your essay with an anecdote or an example. Our third technique is to state a startling fact or an unusual opinion. This method will cause the reader to read to see how you will support your main idea or to defend your opinion. Let's look at this example. It's not the Statue of Liberty, the Liberty Bell, or even Mount Rushmore that best exemplifies the true nature of America. Instead, it is the monument to the boll weevil in Enterprise, Alabama. Built in 1919, this monument is dedicated to the swarm of insects that destroyed this cotton town's main crop. It symbolizes the town's turning its attention to other crops that eventually brought prosperity. This is an example of the true spirit of America, facing adversity and triumphing while maintaining a sense of humor. So here we have an example of starting with a startling fact or an unusual opinion. Our fourth technique is to begin with background information. Facts and other specific details not only help your reader understand your main idea, but they also create interest in your topic. So let's look at this example. For years, Kissimmee, Florida could boast of having the world's largest alligator. Standing adjacent to the Gator Motel, this roadside attraction was a full 126 feet long. However, the reptile had to give up its title in 1912 when 200-foot long and 1-inch thick Swampy appeared in Christmas, Florida. Of course, these are not real alligators, just human-made tributes to creatures that are a part of so many Floridians' lives. So here you have an example of beginning with background information. Our fifth technique for a hook is to set the scene. Just as a short story may begin with a description of the setting, you might describe the setting of your topic. Let's look at this example. Driving across a seemingly endless North Dakota highway, with fields of rye blowing in the wind, weary travelers may not quite believe their eyes. Off on the horizon, starting as barely a speck, comes into view what appears to be a cow, a very big cow. Travelers are drawn to her like a magnet. She's known as Salem Sioux. Standing 38 feet tall, she is the proud symbol of the small dairy town of New Salem. So here's an example of creating the setting as your hook to start your essay. And the last one is you could begin with a simple statement of your thesis. You could be direct and get right to the point. Roadside attractions are a time-honored tradition of American culture, reflecting our big attitudes and sense of humor. So let's review hook. The first few seconds are critical to capture the reader's attention. We're calling this the hook. There are 6 techniques for writing a hook. You can begin with a question. You could begin with an anecdote or example. You could begin with a startling fact or an unusual opinion. You could begin with background information. You could set the scene. Or you could just have a simple statement of your thesis. So this is H in HIT is hook. Moving on to the I. I stands for the intro to the topic and setting the tone. As you introduce the topic of the composition, the words you choose and the details you include, and the rhythm of your sentences all set the composition's tone. The tone is your attitude toward the topic and toward the audience. The tone may be serious, humorous, formal, informal, or critical. So H is for hook, I is for introducing your topic, and T is for thesis statement. The thesis statement is a sentence or two that introduces the reader to your topic and what do you want to say about it. Your thesis statement controls everything that you include in the paper. Thesis statement is very, very important. There are a couple hints for writing and using thesis statements. You need to develop your thesis statement from the information that you've gathered. So if you've done a bit of research, or you've extrapolated a poem, or you have read a short story, you're going to gather the information from your source and pull it all together. And in it you're going to have different facts, different points you want to make, different pieces of evidence and everything. So then when you have all of your evidence in front of you, you're going to ask yourself, what main ideas do these facts suggest? So after you do that, you write a preliminary sentence that will include both a topic and your main ideas about the topic. So most thesis statements will answer two questions. What is my topic, and what am I saying about my topic? And to make sure that you have included both parts on your first draft, one strategy is to underline the topic and to circle the main idea. So let's look at this example. If you take sensible precautions with clothing, equipment, and safety, you can enjoy bicycling all year long. Okay, so I've done some research and study on bicycling all year long, and I come up with this set of facts and information, and I look at it and say, okay, what do I have here? And I conclude that I have information about clothing, equipment, and safety. So I write my initial thesis statement. It'll be my working thesis statement that's going to control my paper as a statement that would include both my topic and then my main idea. So my strategy is, I want to make sure I have those in there. I'm going to underline my topic. So underlining bicycle all year long is my topic. Okay, then I'm going to say, okay, now I need my main idea of what I'm going to talk about. And my main idea is take sensible precautions. And then the facts that I'm going to back it up with will be clothing, equipment, and safety. So now, if I was writing this paper, this statement would control everything that goes into that paper. The third suggestion is to be very clear and specific. You need to keep your language and ideas sharp and definite. Okay, we're going to compare the vague thesis statement that I'm going to pop up there in a minute with the actual one that we've just read. And I put it up on the top so that we can remember what we just read. If you want to continue bicycling, you need to take care of a lot of things. Okay, the idea is there in the vague example, but you lose the specifics. You lose the focus of your paper. So you need to be clear and specific. And then the fourth one is you keep your thesis statement in front of you as you plan and you write. So it will help keep you on track. Every detail and idea that you include should directly support your thesis statement. And if you have a detail or an idea that does not support or keep the focus on your thesis statement, then you need to discard it. Okay, so in this first half of our lesson, we have looked at what makes a composition and the parts of a composition. Now, the rest of our lesson here was simply just about our introduction. So this is the end of part A of this lesson.